Hello friends, welcome to my new video lecture. Today I'll be speaking on the post-colonial term, a post-colonial concept called other used from the post-colonial perspective. So I'll be trying to deal with this concept of other as the other with a capital O and the other with a small o. So this is a distinction we should know as a post-colonial student. And what is basically the concept of other? The other with a small o, beginning with a small o, and the other with a capital O. Now, if we look into the general terms of the meaning of the word other is anyone who is separate from oneself. That is how we know the meaning. So the existence of others is very, very crucial in defining what is normal and also in locating one's own place in the world. Our place is very important to know what is our place in the world, and this concept of our place in the world can only be understood if there is this concept of other. Now the colonial subject is always characterized as other, and there are discourses through which it is characterized. Colonial subjects, any colonial country who had been colonized, and there are specific terms through which they are characterized. For example, primitivism, cannibalism. And why these terms are used? These terms are used to establish a binary separation. And what is the binary separation? Whose binary separation are we talking about? The binary separation between the colonizer and the colonized. I hope you all will recall the binary opposition. What do we mean by the word binary? The basic. For example, white is white because there is black. Day is day because there is night. So these exact opposites are called binaries. And this binary separation had been done so that there is a clear-cut understanding, there is a clear-cut differentiation between the colonizer and the colonized. And it is from that perspective that the colonizer has used the word other. And they have used some characteristic words to define other. And which are those characteristic words? For example, primitivism, cannibalism. And they also, this separation of the colonizer and the colonized, and also what they do is they assert the naturalness and primacy of the colonizing culture and the worldview. Fundamentally, other is crucial, the other with a capital O. This is very, very crucial to the subject, because the subjects always exist in the gaze. I hope you recall the concept of gaze, G-A-Z-E, gaze. And what does Lacan say? Lacan said that all desire is the metonym of the desired to be. This is what Lacan said. All the desire is the metonym of the desire to be. Because the first desire of the subject is the desire to exist in the gaze of the other. Other here, in the gaze of the other that I talk about, other here is the capital O. And this capital O other can be compared to the imperial center, imperial discourse, or it can be compared to the empire itself. And why it can be compared? Basically because of two ways it can be compared. First, it provides the terms in which the colonized subject gains a sense of his or her identity as somehow other dependent. So this other with a capital O acts as the imperial center, as the imperial discourse for the colonized subject of the other with a small o, with the other which is also termed as dependent. This is the first. Second, it becomes the absolute pole of address, the ideological framework in which the colonial subject may come to understand the world. In colonial discourse, the subjectivity of the colonized is continually located in the gaze of the imperial other. What do I mean by that? Here the imperial other is with the capital O, because I told you the imperial other here refers to the colonizer, and the other with a small o refers to the colonized. So the second point which I am saying is, in colonial discourse, I already discussed, what is discourse? Discourse is a one-way form of communication. There is no scope of discussion. There is no scope of sharing the ideas. It's a one-way process of communication, and it's an emphatic process of communication. So this discourse is given by who? The colonizer. And in this colonial discourse, which of course is given by the colonizer, the subjectivity of the colonized, the identity, the importance, the entity of the colonized can only be found, can only be located by who? If the colonizer finds it important. So the colonizer decides. It is the presence of this imperial other. According to the colonial discourse, it is the presence of this imperial other which decides the subjectivity of the colonized subject. Although this particular concept or the term other has been used extensively in existential philosophy also, notably by Sartre. Sartre used in his creation called Being and Nothingness this concept of other to define the relationship between self and other. Why? In order to create self-awareness and ideas of identity. The definition of the term as used in current post-colonial theory is also deep-rooted in the Freudian and the post-Freudian analysis of the formation of subjectivity, most notably in the works of the psychoanalyst and the cultural theorist Lacan. Lacan uses this term which involves a distinction between other with a capital and with a small. So in Lacan's theory, the other with a small o, what it designates? In Lacan's theory, it designates the other who resembles the self, which the child discovers. We have to understand. We know what is a mirror stage in a child. Before the mirror stage, the child is not able to identify himself or herself as a in terms of the physicality. Now, during the mirror stage, when the child witnesses his or her body, a physical entity, and one which the child was thinking about himself, the conscience, the thought process. In the mirror stage, the child discovers that there is a difference between my thought process, the thinking, the feeling, the emotions, and a body as a separate being. So this other, according to Lacan, the small o other, according to Lacan, resembles the self which the child discovers when it looks in the mirror and becomes aware of itself as a separate being. Now when the child, which is an incoordinated, combination of mass of limbs, flesh, feelings, sees its image in the mirror, the image also must bear sufficient resemblance to the child to be recognized. But it must also be separate enough to ground the child's hope for an anticipated mastery. This fiction of mastery will become the basis of the ego, which Lacan talks about. This other, the small o, is important in defining the identity of the subject. Very important. And in post-colonial theory, it can refer to the colonized other, the small o, who of course are marginalized by the imperial discourse. They are identified by their difference from the center, the imperial center that I talked about, and perhaps crucially becomes the focus of anticipated mastery by the imperial ego. So I hope you understand. The Lacan's ego, where the Lacan talks about a child, his physical entity, which plays a very significant role in the mirror stage in development, in recognizing that physical, entity as a separate human being, constitutes very, very importantly in the formation of the ego. In that same way, this other of O, small o, refers to the colonized other, who are completely marginalized by the imperial discourse. They are identified by their difference from the imperial center, and perhaps becomes very, very crucial the focus of the anticipated mastery of the imperial ego. This other, now I talk about the capital other, has been called by grand autre by Lacan, the great other, in whose gaze the subject gains identity. So the capital other becomes the source of the subject for the small other. This capital other, mind you, is the imperial other. This capital other is the colonizer, who becomes the source for the colonized other, that is the small o other. The symbolic other, this other with the capital, the symbolic other with the capital O, is not a real interlocutor, but it can be embodied in other subjects such as the mother or the father that represents it. Thus the other, the capital other, can refer to the mother whose separation from the subject locates her as the first focus of desire. Now we come back to the child concept. From the perspective of the child, if you see, the capital other is somebody who is the boss, who is considered to be, who is the dependent, on whom the small other can depend, the child can depend. So mother or the father acts as the other. It can also refer to the father, of course, whose otherness locates the subject in the symbolic order. It can also refer to the unconscious self, because the unconscious is structured like a language. That it is separate from the language of the subject. The master is inseparable from the slave. The identities of the men are interlocked with those of women, and the subjectivity of the colonial ruler is forged in tandem with the colonial subject. That is the focal point here. And this focal point, the discussion of Orientalism, of course, in details by Edward Said, contains one of the better known uses of the concept of the other with the capital O. Here, what the other, the capital other with the capital O, constitutes is a projection by the Western powers onto the empty subject position of the other. So, in a layman's language, what we can understand is, this other is, there are two kinds of other. One is the capital O and the other is the small o. The capital O is the imperial other, the imperial center, from the perspective of postcolonialism. And from the perspective of Lacanian theory, this other can be two things. The capital other is the mother or the father who the subject is dependent on, the child is dependent on, and the small other, O, from Lacanian perspective, is the child, physicality which the child is able to recognize during his or her mirror stage. And from the colonial perspective and the post-colonial perspective, this capital other O is the imperial other who decides the existence, the importance, the presence of the small o other. The gaze. Through their, and how do they do that? This imperial other, through their colonial discourse. Through their colonial discourse. And this capital other is the imperial other, the capital O, the empire itself. Okay. So in short, what I can I conclude by saying that the capital O from the post-colonial perspective is the colonizer, and the small o is the colonized. Then you have the Lacanian perspective, and this is so in one way or the other there is a master-slave relationship also, and also there is an inseparable relationship between the master and the slave, or the boss and the you can say the worker. I hope I was able to give you an idea about this concept. Of course, when we talk about post-colonialism in details, we always can come back to this concept. Thank you very much for watching my video, and if you like my video, please subscribe my YouTube channel. This is Dr. Shoykot Banerjee signing off. May God bless you all. Have a blast out there, and thank you very much for sparing your time. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much.